Good evening, it is September 24th, 2021. Welcome to Pistol Squat 101. Today we're going through a journey of 4 exercises to progress into the pistol squat. The pistol squat is a single leg squatting motion that requires a maximal depth squat with a significant amount of strength, mobility, and coordination in the ankle, knee, and hip joints. To progress through the pistol squat motions, we are going to start with a bilateral squat. This is a simple exercise that can tell us if the athlete has a capacity to move through the hip, knee, and ankle in an adequate fashion to perform a full depth squat.
In the bilateral squat, I'm trying to lower myself as deep as I can while descending evenly in the hip and knee joint. The angle of my shin and back stay fairly parallel until the deepest point of the squat where my ankle stops my knee from moving any further forward. Even while actively pulling my toe towards my shin, I can't get my knee to go any further forward. Consequently, in order to keep dropping my hips lower with my knee joint, I have to flex at the spine to keep my center of mass over my foot. As the verticality of my spine is compromised, it becomes much more difficult to balance, which is why this is often a limiting factor in the squat depth of the pistol squat.
Moving forward, we'll go into a rear foot elevated squat. This will be a test of unilateral strength, and it'll be an exercise that we can load fairly heavily before progressing into deeper degrees of flexion and single leg control. I've chosen a dumbbell to be held in the goblet squat form for this front loading. This is important because as we dip into a rear foot elevated squat, it's easy to keep the ankle out of the equation, though by front loading, we can more easily load into a deeper degree of flexion into the ankle and the knee, thus creating a more similar pattern to the pistol squat. You could also use a bar in a Zercher squat, or a kettlebell, or a heavy ball of sorts, whatever works for you. Next is the skater squat. This is going to be the first exercise in this progression to be completely unassisted in a single leg loading pattern. So once strength and mobility are developed, we want to start progressing into a deeper degree of flexion and coordination, that is depth and complexity towards the pistol squat.
Initially, it may be helpful to have a target closer than the ground, as the final few inches become much more difficult to maintain strength and balance. That's precisely the intention to progressing to a skater squat. We want to master a controlled descent without the aid of another limb. Otherwise, this is similar in almost every way to the rear foot elevated squat, except now the focus is more on coordination and depth. As the movement gets easier, lower the target depth to the ground. It's going to be important to really own your rate of descent in the last few inches, so resist the urge to drop the knee quickly onto the ground. As a challenge, try reaching out for an object and placing it back onto the ground even further than before. You want to develop a multi-planar ability to adjust your center of mass, and this will force you to reach the limits of your hip and ankle flexion as you develop coordination.
Finally, we have touchdown, performed beautifully by Coach Eric. This is going to be the most specific exercise as we have developed strength and mobility enough to drop into a slow progression of the deepest single leg squat we can. Touchdowns are going to be using a box or some form of stackable object to drop into deeper and deeper levels into a final pistol squat.
There are going to be 2 phases to progressing the touchdowns. The first is decreasing the depth of the squat with the foot touching straight down. 3 inches might seem comically low, but the intention early on is just to actualize the hip, knee, and ankle descending at the same angular rate, stacked over each other in the sagittal plane, and keeping the pelvis steady from side to side or in the frontal plane. Keep decreasing the stack height, progressing only after a successfully controlled descent, and then until you can no longer reach the ground. In the second phase, maintain the depth you've worked up to, but try keeping the touchdown leg off the ground and flexed at the hip. We're going to be using a target as we lower the stack height. Just like the skater squats, this is a useful way to reach for a new degree of hip flexion. Honestly, simply getting the non-stance leg parallel to the ground can be one of the most challenging pieces to a pistol squat. So finally here we're working on the barrel, so to speak, of the pistol squat. And eventually, after dropping the stack height to 0, the leg is forced to hover off the ground. Here it might be useful to groove in the control of the depth with a slider. Any torque of the knee outside of the sagittal plane at this depth can create a lot of shearing forces on the joint. But if you're sitting in the deepest squat you can, and you don't have a droopy barrel, congratulations, you just whipped out a pistol, and that's legal anywhere, even without a license to carry. To further progress a pistol squat, I would suggest dialing back the balance and stability and grabbing a fixed loaded object like this barbell to increase the intensity and load in a controlled manner. Once you adapt to that load, then get creative. Find a new way to load an unassisted pattern, develop that strength and coordination, and then check your firepower back on the pistol squat. At the very least, you're going to have some lethal single leg control.